The rain did not simply fall upon Ashcombe that afternoon, it declared war upon it. Slate-gray clouds swallowed the autumn sky, thunder rolled across the valley like distant cannons, and relentless sheets of rain transformed the duchy's elegant streets into rivers of thick brown mud. Horses struggled against the slippery cobblestones, carriage wheels sank into deep ruts, and respectable gentlemen hurried beneath dripping umbrellas while merchants rushed to rescue their goods from the storm. Yet amid the chaos stood one little bakery glowing like a beacon of warmth, its golden windows casting honey-colored light onto the rain-soaked street, inviting every weary traveler with the comforting fragrance of fresh bread, cinnamon pastries, and melting butter. The modest shop belonged to Miss Eliza Whitmore, a 25-year-old baker whose beauty was never announced by jewels or silk. Soft chestnut curls escaped the cream-colored scarf wrapped around her dark hair, and flour dusted the sleeves of her plain linen dress like fresh snow upon autumn branches. Her expressive hazel eyes held quiet intelligence rather than vanity, and her gentle smile appeared only when honestly earned. Every shelf inside the bakery gleamed from careful polishing, every wooden table shone with loving attention, and every loaf rested in perfect rows as though each deserved the same respect as a royal banquet. The townspeople often laughed about Eliza's single unwavering rule: no muddy boots beyond this doorway. Some considered it amusing. Others called it stubborn. A few whispered that she would never become wealthy if she continued turning customers away over something as foolish as dirty footwear. Whenever anyone questioned her, she answered with exactly the same calm conviction. Clean floors can always be washed, she would say while kneading dough with practiced hands. Dirty character is much harder to remove. Most people smiled politely. Few truly understood. The little brass bell above the entrance chimed as the storm reached its fiercest fury. Every conversation inside the bakery faded. A tall stranger stepped into the doorway. Rain streamed from the brim of his dark hat and dripped steadily from his long black overcoat. His broad shoulders carried themselves with quiet confidence despite the weather, yet his face revealed neither arrogance nor fear. Thick mud clung stubbornly to his worn leather boots after what had clearly been a long journey through flooded roads and neglected villages. Several customers immediately stepped aside. Not because they recognized him. Because he possessed the unmistakable presence of a man accustomed to responsibility. Without raising her voice, Eliza laid her wooden spoon across the doorway like a tiny gate. "I'm sorry," she said kindly, meeting his steady blue eyes. "No muddy boots in my bakery." A ripple of laughter spread through the room. An elderly merchant shook his head. "Miss Whitmore," he chuckled, "look outside. Every soul in Ashcombe wears muddy boots today." She smiled politely but never lowered the spoon. "Then every soul may clean them before coming inside." The stranger glanced toward the polished wooden floor that reflected the warm lantern light. Then he looked back at her. "You refuse every customer?" he asked. "I refuse muddy boots," she answered. "Never people." The customers waited for an argument. Instead, the stranger gave a respectful nod. "As you wish." Without another word, he stepped back into the freezing rain. Curiosity drew every face toward the window. They watched him kneel beside the overflowing stone gutter where rainwater rushed along the street. Patiently, almost meticulously, he scrubbed every trace of mud from his boots using nothing except the storm itself. Cold water soaked his gloves while passing horses splashed fresh puddles around him, yet he never complained. Inside the bakery, laughter slowly disappeared. Even Eliza found herself quietly surprised. A few moments later he returned. His boots were spotless. She stepped aside immediately. "Welcome," she said warmly. He entered without triumph or resentment. Only quiet dignity. The rich scent of warm bread wrapped around him as he removed his gloves and approached the counter. "What would you recommend?" he asked. "The country loaf," Eliza replied. "It keeps well during long journeys." "I'll take one." She wrapped the loaf carefully in brown paper. Their hands briefly touched as she passed it across the counter. His hands bore fresh blisters. Not the smooth hands of idle nobility, nor the rough calluses of a laborer. They belonged to someone accustomed to both writing and hard work. "You've traveled far," she observed. "I've traveled where I was needed." Before she could ask another question, frantic hoofbeats thundered outside. The bakery door burst open. Rain blew inside with half a dozen armored royal guards. Water pooled across the threshold as their captain scanned every face before dropping instantly onto one knee. Relief flooded his voice. "Your Grace, we've searched every village since dawn." Every customer froze. One woman gasped. The merchant nearly dropped his basket. All eyes turned toward the quiet traveler holding nothing more than a loaf of bread. Eliza's heart stopped. "Your Grace." The words echoed inside her mind like church bells. The soaked stranger slowly removed his hat. Dark hair framed a clean-shaven face marked by calm intelligence rather than royal pride. His blue eyes settled gently upon Eliza. He was Duke Nathaniel Ashcombe, master of the entire duchy, the most powerful man any of them had ever seen. One by one, every customer bowed. Several fell to their knees. Silence swallowed the bakery. Eliza remained standing behind her counter, her wooden spoon still resting in her flour-covered hand. Her cheeks flushed with sudden realization as she remembered blocking the doorway, refusing him entry, and making the ruler of Ashcombe wash his own boots in the rain. She expected anger, a fine, perhaps even prison. Instead, Nathaniel smiled. Not politely, genuinely. "I have visited grand estates with marble floors," he said softly enough that every person strained to hear. "Yet today I entered the cleanest place in my entire duchy." No one breathed. He looked directly at Eliza. "You protected your principles before my title." He lifted the loaf slightly. "I wish more people did." Then, with a courteous nod, the Duke turned and disappeared into the rain alongside his astonished guards, leaving behind a bakery filled with absolute silence. Long after the horses vanished into the storm, no one spoke. Only Eliza stood motionless behind her counter, still holding the little wooden spoon that had stopped the Duke at her door, never imagining that somewhere beyond the rain-soaked street, inside a waiting black carriage, Nathaniel Ashcombe was already giving a quiet order to his coachman. "Tomorrow morning," he said while watching the bakery through the rain-streaked window, "we return for another loaf." Morning sunlight returned to Ashcombe as though the violent storm had never existed, painting the damp rooftops with soft gold while thin wisps of mist drifted above the cobbled streets. Merchants reopened their stalls, children chased one another through puddles, and the familiar fragrance of rising bread once again escaped the windows of Whitmore Bakery. Inside, Miss Eliza Whitmore kneaded fresh dough with steady hands, yet her thoughts wandered far from the warm kitchen. She had replayed the previous afternoon countless times, wondering why a duke had smiled instead of punishing her. Every customer who entered seemed eager to discuss nothing else, and rumors multiplied faster than loaves inside her ovens. Some claimed the duke admired her courage. Others insisted he had merely found amusement in a stubborn baker. A few predicted royal inspectors would soon arrive to close her shop. Eliza ignored every theory. Her bakery had survived because she focused upon flour instead of gossip. As the brass bell chimed shortly after sunrise, she glanced toward the doorway without expectation. The same traveler stood there. Only today his boots were perfectly clean. He removed his hat politely before stepping inside. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," she answered with surprising calm. "You remembered the rule." "I remembered the woman." A faint warmth reached her cheeks before she quickly turned toward the bread shelves. "The country loaf again? If you recommend nothing better. I've baked rosemary bread this morning." "I'll trust your judgment." She wrapped the loaf while noticing he wore the same plain traveling clothes rather than noble attire. Nothing about him announced his station except the quiet confidence with which he observed everything around him. He thanked her sincerely, paid the exact price without requesting favor, and departed before curious customers could gather around him. The following morning he returned. Then the morning after that. Always alone. Always disguised. Always purchasing only a single loaf. Soon his visits became as predictable as sunrise itself. People gradually stopped whispering whenever he entered, believing perhaps that the Duke simply enjoyed ordinary bread. Yet Eliza noticed details everyone else overlooked. Before entering the bakery, he brushed fallen leaves away from her doorstep with a simple broom leaning against the wall. He straightened flower pots after strong winds knocked them crooked. If muddy footprints appeared near the entrance, he quietly fetched water and cleaned the stones without being asked. One afternoon an elderly widow struggled to lift a heavy sack of flour onto her small cart. Before anyone else reacted, the traveler carried it effortlessly across the street. The widow tried to thank him. He only tipped his hat and walked away before praise could follow. Another morning a loose chair leg collapsed beneath an old schoolmaster. The stranger borrowed a hammer from Eliza's workshop, repaired the chair within minutes, and returned to his bread as though nothing unusual had happened. Children waiting outside the bakery slowly gathered around him. Instead of entertaining them with grand stories, he carved tiny wooden birds from discarded apple crates using an ordinary pocket knife. Every child received one before he quietly resumed his journey. Watching through the window, Eliza wondered what kind of nobleman preferred serving strangers instead of commanding servants. One crisp afternoon she found him sweeping rainwater away from her doorway before customers arrived. "You know," she said gently, stepping outside with fresh rolls cooling in a basket, "that isn't your responsibility." He rested both hands upon the broom. "Neither is feeding travelers. I sell bread. You give dignity." She studied him carefully. "Those aren't always the same thing." "No," he admitted softly. "They're rarely the same." Their conversation ended as customers approached, yet his words lingered in her thoughts throughout the day. As autumn deepened, darker clouds returned above Ashcombe. Rain began once more during the busiest hour of the afternoon. The traveler finished paying for his loaf and stepped toward the door. Only then did Eliza notice he had forgotten the weathered umbrella he usually carried. Without allowing herself time to reconsider, she hurried after him. "Wait." He turned. She extended an old umbrella with a polished walnut handle. "It belonged to my father. I couldn't possibly." "You can return it tomorrow." He accepted it carefully. Their fingers touched around the smooth wooden handle. Neither released it immediately. Rain whispered against the rooftops while the busy street faded strangely silent around them. His blue eyes met hers with quiet gratitude. "They must have been a good man," he said. He believed kindness should remain anonymous. A thoughtful smile crossed Nathaniel's face. "I hope to deserve borrowing his umbrella." Only then did their hands separate. He disappeared into the rain, carrying far more than shelter. That evening Eliza visited Mrs. Abigail Turner, an elderly widow whose husband had once supplied flour to the bakery. She intended only to deliver fresh rolls. Instead she found the old woman smiling through grateful tears. "My bread account has been paid for the entire winter," Mrs. Turner whispered. "Who paid it?" "I don't know. The baker only said a gentleman insisted his name remain secret." Eliza quietly checked her account books after returning home. Several struggling families carried identical anonymous payments. Every debt had been settled. Every payment matched the price of one country loaf purchased each morning. Her heart immediately suspected the traveler. The following day she watched carefully. After buying his bread, he crossed the street instead of leaving town. Hidden behind stacked flour barrels, she observed him speaking quietly with the village miller's wife. He handed her a small envelope before walking away. When the woman opened it, tears filled her eyes. Inside rested enough coins to purchase medicine for her sick husband. No signature. No explanation. Only silent compassion. Eliza followed him at a respectful distance until he paused beside the old stone bridge beyond the market square. There he watched children laughing beside the river, his expression carrying both affection and sadness, as though remembering a happiness that had vanished years earlier. For several long moments he stood completely motionless before turning back toward town. That evening she finally asked him the question growing inside her heart. "Why do you hide your kindness?" Nathaniel considered the warm loaf resting between his hands. "Because gratitude changes when people know whom they should thank." "You'd rather remain invisible?" "I'd rather know whether goodness survives without applause." She looked at him differently after that. Not as a mysterious nobleman. Not even as a duke. But as a lonely man searching for something the world rarely offered freely. Respect quietly replaced curiosity. Meanwhile, Nathaniel noticed unfamiliar wagons rolling through Ashcombe after midnight, each heavily guarded despite carrying ordinary flour sacks. Farmers entering the bakery complained about impossible taxes. Mothers whispered that children from neighboring villages had vanished without explanation. Whenever those stories surfaced, his calm expression tightened almost imperceptibly. One stormy evening he unfolded a weathered map inside his rented room, placing colored pins across villages suffering identical misfortunes. Every trail, every missing shipment, every frightened testimony converged toward one sprawling estate beyond the northern woods. Nathaniel stared at the final pin before pressing it into the parchment with deliberate force. "Victor," he murmured into the darkness, "if these shadows truly belong to you, then the woman who taught me the value of honest doors may soon stand in the path of dangerous men." Nathaniel arrived before sunrise carrying neither royal banners nor armed escorts, only a weathered satchel filled with maps, ledgers, and unanswered questions. He entered the bakery through the back door while ovens glowed softly with fresh firelight. Eliza looked up from shaping dough, surprised but not alarmed. His expression carried a gravity she had never seen before. Without ceremony he placed several faded tax records across the flour-dusted table. Columns of numbers had been altered, signatures copied, and village names scratched away. "I need your eyes," he said quietly. "You know these people better than anyone." She studied the pages carefully. Every missing shipment listed flour from mills supplying her bakery. Every erased village belonged to families who had recently complained of hunger despite excellent harvests. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Someone had diverted food before it reached the people, then demanded higher taxes for shortages deliberately created. Eliza slowly raised her gaze. "This isn't greed," she whispered. "It's planned." Nathaniel nodded. "And whoever planned it controls officials willing to lie." Instead of shrinking from danger, Eliza untied her apron, folded it neatly, and reached for her coat. Then we stopped guessing. They spent the day visiting farmers scattered across the duchy. Gray skies hung low above fields where healthy grain should have promised prosperity, yet empty storehouses stood beside abandoned wagons. Parents spoke in hushed voices, glancing nervously toward distant roads before answering questions. An elderly miller revealed that armed men collected flour after sunset without official receipts. A widow admitted her grandson disappeared after accepting work at a warehouse offering generous wages. Nobody dared accuse Lord Victor Ashcroft directly, yet every frightened silence pointed toward his estates. That evening Nathaniel finally trusted Eliza with the truth he had hidden. "I never wandered this duchy for adventure," he confessed beside a quiet stream. "My parents died believing Ashcombe was honorable. I refused to inherit comforting lies. I disguised myself because titles close mouths instead of opening them." She watched ripples carry fallen leaves downstream. "And what have you discovered?" "That corruption wears expensive coats and smiles politely." Her voice remained steady. "Then perhaps it needs someone carrying a wooden spoon instead of a sword." For the first time that difficult day Nathaniel laughed. Night settled across the countryside beneath a moon hidden by drifting clouds. Guided by directions from the frightened miller, they followed a narrow woodland path toward abandoned flour mills officially closed for years. Thick ivy covered cracked stone walls, yet fresh horse tracks cut deeply through wet earth. Lantern light flickered behind broken windows where no workers should have remained. Nathaniel signaled for silence. Together they slipped through a shattered doorway. Dust floated through cold air scented with damp timber and burnt oil. Beneath rotting machinery they discovered recent footprints leading toward a concealed trapdoor hidden beneath stacked grain sacks. Nathaniel lifted the heavy wooden panel. A staircase descended into darkness. Eliza swallowed hard. "We're not turning back." "Not while children may be below," he answered. The underground passages stretched farther than either imagined. Secret tunnels connected warehouses, river docks, and storage chambers carved beneath the hills. Crates overflowing with stolen grain lined the walls beside barrels marked with forged royal seals. Shelves held counterfeit tax documents bearing Nathaniel's signature copied with astonishing skill. Then they heard coughing. Beyond iron bars sat exhausted children sorting flour into smaller sacks with trembling hands. Thin faces lifted hopefully as lantern light reached them. Eliza recognized several immediately. "They came to my bridge," she whispered in horror. "I fed them." One frightened boy stepped forward. "They said our families owed taxes," he murmured. "They told us we had to work until the debt disappeared." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. No child owes anyone their freedom. He forced open the lock while Eliza gathered the weakest children together. Before they could leave, hurried footsteps echoed through the tunnels. Mercenaries carrying torches rushed from every passage. "They've been discovered." Nathaniel extinguished his lantern instantly. "Run!" Chaos exploded beneath the earth. Smoke filled the cramped corridors as burning oil spread across wooden beams. Nathaniel guided the children toward an escape tunnel while Eliza carried a little girl too exhausted to stand. Flaming supports crashed behind them, showering sparks across scattered grain. The tunnels became choking furnaces. They burst into the night just as fire consumed the abandoned mill. Waiting nearby stood mounted riders wearing Lord Victor's colors. Without hesitation Nathaniel lifted two children onto a waiting horse and helped Eliza climb behind them. Hooves thundered through rain-soaked forests while arrows sliced between branches overhead. The frightened children clung tightly as horses leaped fallen logs and splashed across swollen streams. Ahead, the only bridge crossing the river groaned beneath rushing water. Nathaniel urged the horses forward. Halfway across, mercenaries reached the opposite end. Steel flashed. One rider hacked through supporting ropes. The ancient bridge shuddered violently. "Jump!" Nathaniel shouted. Their horses lunged across collapsing planks moments before the center span crashed into the roaring river below, carrying pursuing riders into dark water. Safe upon the opposite bank, Nathaniel raised a concealed silver whistle hanging beneath his shirt and blew 3 sharp notes. Within moments royal cavalry emerged from surrounding woods, surrounding the remaining mercenaries. Captain Ellis dismounted immediately, saluting his duke before escorting the rescued children toward safety. As flames illuminated the distant sky, Nathaniel watched soldiers gather forged ledgers rescued from the tunnels. Every page confirmed years of theft, child labor, and stolen taxes. Yet among the recovered documents lay one sealed letter addressed not to Lord Victor but to Lady Beatrice Ashcroft. Nathaniel broke the wax seal, read only the opening lines, and his expression turned colder than the river rushing beneath the ruined bridge, because the conspiracy threatening Ashcombe reached far beyond one ambitious cousin. The letter mentioned judges already purchased, newspapers prepared to spread lies, and one final instruction: destroy the baker before the Duke discovers everything. Eliza met Nathaniel's stunned gaze, realizing the danger had only begun. Before dawn painted the eastern sky, the smell of smoke drifted across Ashcombe like an omen. Sleeping families hurried from their homes as orange flames rose above Market Street, swallowing the little bakery that had long filled the town with warmth instead of fear. Fire devoured wooden shelves, shattered glass burst outward with sharp cracks, and sparks whirled into the dark morning air. By the time the first bucket brigade arrived, the roof had already collapsed, leaving only blackened beams standing like broken ribs against the fading stars. Eliza reached the scene breathless. She stood motionless as years of patient labor disappeared before her eyes. The ovens where she had baked thousands of loaves were buried beneath burning timbers. Her father's old mixing table had become little more than glowing embers. The wooden spoon that had once stopped the Duke lay hidden somewhere beneath the wreckage. No tears came. The loss was too enormous for weeping. Nathaniel arrived moments later with Captain Ellis and several royal guards. He immediately ordered the surrounding buildings protected before the flames could spread farther. When the final fire was extinguished, investigators searched every corner of the ruins. They found broken oil jars deliberately scattered beneath the floorboards and scraps of cloth soaked with lamp fuel. "It wasn't an accident," Ellis reported quietly. Nathaniel looked toward the silent crowd gathering across the street. "I never believed it was." Yet Lord Victor moved even faster than the investigation. Before sunset, whispers drifted through every marketplace, tavern, and churchyard. Lady Beatrice Ashcroft appeared at charity gatherings dressed in mourning black, speaking with practiced sadness about the unfortunate baker who had supposedly captured the Duke's attention through manipulation rather than honesty. "I pity her," she sighed loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. Poor girls sometimes confuse ambition with affection. Within days the gossip transformed into printed lies. Local newspapers claimed Eliza had staged her kindness to impress the Duke. Anonymous writers accused her of inventing stories about starving children. Others insisted she had persuaded Nathaniel to investigate respectable noble families for personal revenge. Merchants who had once greeted her warmly now lowered their eyes. Some customers crossed the street rather than pass the burned bakery. Even a few mothers quietly warned their children to avoid speaking with her. The cruelty wounded far more deeply than the fire. One rainy afternoon Eliza carried fresh bread from a temporary kitchen she had borrowed outside town. She approached the old stone bridge where orphan children still waited each evening. Instead of running toward her with delighted smiles, several hesitated. A little girl finally asked, "Miss Eliza, are you leaving us for the palace?" The innocent question pierced her heart. She knelt before them. "I baked for you before I knew a duke." She gently handed the child a warm loaf. "And I'll bake for you long after everyone forgets his name." The children embraced her without another word. Hidden nearby beneath dripping trees, Nathaniel witnessed the quiet exchange. He understood something no newspaper could erase. Truth revealed itself most clearly where applause never reached. The following morning the people of Ashcombe awoke to an astonishing sight. Their Duke was carrying bricks. Not issuing commands. Not riding a magnificent horse. Simply carrying worn red bricks across the muddy street toward the ruins of Whitmore Bakery. He set the first brick carefully upon the cleared foundation. Then another. And another. Workers paused. Shopkeepers stared through open windows. No royal proclamation explained his actions. None was needed. An elderly mason silently picked up his own tools. A carpenter followed carrying timber across his shoulder. Blacksmiths donated iron hinges. Glaziers offered fresh window panes. Farmers arrived with wagons full of stone. Women prepared meals for volunteers. Children collected scattered nails from the ashes. Soon the empty street echoed not with gossip but with hammers striking wood, saws cutting beams, and neighbors calling encouragement across rising walls. No speeches celebrated generosity. The rebuilding itself became the answer to every lie. For the first time since the fire, Eliza allowed hope to enter her heart. Days blended into weeks beneath crisp autumn skies. The bakery slowly rose again, stronger than before. One evening after every volunteer had gone home, only Nathaniel and Eliza remained inside the unfinished building. Temporary ovens glowed softly while flour drifted through warm lamplight like pale dust suspended in quiet air. Together they prepared dough in comfortable silence. Nathaniel accidentally brushed flour across his sleeve. Eliza laughed. "You've somehow managed to make yourself look less dignified than the day I stopped you at the door." He looked down at his white-coated waistcoat. "I suspected rebuilding bakeries required unusual fashion." She reached forward without thinking and gently dusted flour from his collar. For a heartbeat neither moved. The unfinished walls seemed to disappear around them. "I owe you more than this building," Nathaniel said softly. "You owe me nothing. I owe you the reminder that authority means service." She smiled. "My father always believed bread tastes better when pride stays outside. So does leadership." Their eyes met with quiet understanding neither dared name aloud. Then hurried footsteps interrupted the stillness. Captain Ellis entered carrying a frightened boy wrapped in a patched wool blanket. Nathaniel recognized him instantly as one of the children rescued from Lord Victor's tunnels. The boy struggled to catch his breath. "They came back," he whispered. "Who?" Nathaniel asked. "The men with Victor's crest." Fear shook every word. "They took more children from the riverside village." His small hands trembled uncontrollably. "I heard them say they must leave before the court opens because the Duke is getting too close." Silence settled over the unfinished bakery. Nathaniel slowly closed his flour-covered hands. Eliza looked toward the dark window where distant thunder rolled once again across Ashcombe. The fire had failed. The lies had failed. Now desperation had driven their enemies toward something even more terrible. Nathaniel turned to Captain Ellis. "Prepare every loyal rider before sunrise." Then he faced Eliza. "I cannot ask you to come." She answered before he finished speaking. "You never needed to." Outside, rain began falling across the newly rebuilt roof, and somewhere beyond the northern woods, frightened children waited in darkness while Lord Victor prepared one final gamble that would either secure his escape forever or bring the entire duchy crashing into war. Rain fell steadily across the northern forests as dawn struggled to break through thick clouds, turning every winding path into slick ribbons of mud. Nathaniel rode at the head of a column of loyal royal guards, his expression carved from quiet determination rather than anger. Beside him rode Eliza, refusing every attempt to persuade her to remain behind. She knew the frightened children by name. She had fed them beneath the old stone bridge when the rest of the kingdom had looked away. If they were in danger, she would not abandon them now. Captain Ellis guided the company toward an abandoned riverside shipping yard hidden between towering cliffs and dense pine trees. Smoke drifted lazily from broken chimneys, and several large barges waited along the swollen river, their decks loaded with sealed crates. Everything appeared strangely calm. Too calm. Nathaniel raised one hand. The cavalry stopped instantly. "Victor expects soldiers," he whispered. "He will be watching the main entrance." Eliza studied the riverbank before pointing toward a narrow footpath almost hidden beneath tangled ivy. "When I delivered bread to the fishermen years ago, they used that trail to reach the docks unseen." Nathaniel looked at her with quiet admiration. "You notice everything." "I bake for people. I remember where they live." Leaving the horses concealed among the trees, they quietly followed the overgrown path until the warehouses came into view. Through broken windows they saw frightened children huddled together beneath armed guards. Some were barely old enough to carry the heavy sacks stacked beside them. Others clutched younger brothers and sisters, trying desperately to comfort them. Eliza's heart tightened. "There are more than before." Nathaniel nodded grimly. "Victor intends to sell them across the border before the royal court can hear their testimony." Captain Ellis signaled several guards toward the rear entrances. Nathaniel turned to Eliza. "When the fighting begins, take the children through the eastern gate. Don't stop for anyone." She met his eyes steadily. "I'll bring every one of them home." The attack began with perfect silence. Royal archers disabled the watchmen without raising an alarm. Guards slipped through side doors while Nathaniel forced open the warehouse entrance. "For Ashcombe," Captain Ellis shouted. Chaos erupted. Mercenaries rushed forward with drawn swords. Steel rang against steel as fierce combat spread through the enormous building. Crates crashed to the floor. Lanterns shattered, sending sparks across scattered straw. Horses outside reared nervously as shouting echoed through the river valley. Nathaniel fought with remarkable precision, protecting his soldiers while steadily advancing toward Lord Victor. His cousin stood calmly upon the loading platform overlooking the warehouse floor, dressed in expensive riding clothes untouched by the struggle below. "I knew you'd come," Victor called with a mocking smile. "You've hidden behind innocent children long enough," Nathaniel answered. Victor laughed softly. "Innocent? There's simply another resource. Just like grain. Just like taxes. Everything has a price." "Not everything." Nathaniel climbed the platform. "Honor never does." Their swords met with explosive force. Meanwhile, Eliza hurried toward the frightened children. She unlocked heavy chains securing the warehouse doors and quickly gathered the youngest together. "Stay close to me," she said gently. "No one gets left behind." One terrified little boy suddenly cried out, "My sister!" He pointed toward another storage room whose door had been bolted from outside. Without hesitation, Eliza ran toward it. She struggled against the heavy iron lock before finally forcing it open with a discarded crowbar. Inside she found 6 younger children locked together in darkness. One tiny girl immediately recognized her. "The bread lady?" Eliza smiled through tears. "Yes." The children rushed into her arms. "You remembered us." "I always will." Outside, the battle intensified. Victor proved faster than Nathaniel expected, fighting not with honor but ruthless desperation. During a violent exchange he deliberately kicked over a stack of burning lanterns, igniting oil spilled across the wooden dock leading toward the barges. Flames spread rapidly. Smoke poured across the riverfront. Victor retreated toward the largest vessel waiting downstream. "If I cannot rule Ashcombe," he shouted, "I'll leave it in ashes." Nathaniel pursued him across the burning dock while collapsing beams crashed into the river below. Behind them, Eliza successfully guided dozens of rescued children toward the eastern gate exactly as planned. Then she counted them. Her smile vanished. One child was missing. Little Samuel, the youngest boy. She looked back toward the burning warehouse. Without hesitation she turned around. Captain Ellis reached for her arm. "Miss Whitmore, don't." But she was already running through thick smoke. Inside the collapsing building, Samuel crouched beneath a fallen timber, too frightened to move. Flames surrounded him. Eliza ignored the choking heat and lifted the heavy beam with every ounce of strength she possessed. The child crawled free. Just then part of the roof collapsed behind them. Their escape disappeared beneath burning debris. Outside, Nathaniel saw the explosion. His heart froze. "Eliza." Without another thought he abandoned his duel with Victor and sprinted back toward the warehouse. Victor seized the opportunity to flee onto the waiting barge. Nathaniel ignored him. Some victories mattered more than revenge. He crashed through the burning doorway moments before another beam collapsed. Smoke blinded him. Then he heard her voice. "We're here." Following the sound, he reached Eliza and Samuel trapped beneath falling rafters. Nathaniel wrapped his coat around the frightened boy before lifting the burning timber blocking their path. The effort strained every muscle in his body. "Hurry." Eliza carried Samuel beneath the raised beam. Nathaniel followed only seconds before the entire roof crashed behind them with a deafening roar. Outside, soldiers erupted in relieved cheers. Samuel buried his face against Eliza's shoulder, safe at last. Captain Ellis pointed toward the river. "My Duke." Victor's barge had nearly reached midstream. Nathaniel accepted a cavalry horse without hesitation. Galloping alongside the riverbank, he reached an old stone crossing farther downstream just as the fleeing vessel approached beneath it. With perfect timing he leaped from the bridge onto the moving barge. Victor spun around in disbelief. "You should have saved yourself." Nathaniel stood firmly despite the rocking deck. "I already did." Their final duel lasted only moments. Victor fought wildly, driven by panic rather than skill. One reckless strike left him off balance. Nathaniel disarmed him cleanly. Victor stumbled backward until his shoulders struck the mast. Royal guards boarded from both sides, surrounding him completely. For the first time in years, Lord Victor Ashcroft had nowhere left to run. Days later, the royal court convened before citizens from every village. The stolen ledgers, forged seals, rescued children, and recovered taxes revealed the full extent of Victor's crimes. The judges who had accepted bribes were removed from office. Illegal labor camps were dismantled. Confiscated wealth rebuilt farms, schools, mills, and homes across the duchy. Lady Beatrice's lies collapsed beneath overwhelming truth, and the newspapers that had once slandered Eliza printed public apologies on their front pages. Winter slowly gave way to spring. The rebuilt bakery opened its doors once more beneath a beautifully carved sign reading, Royal Bakery of Ashcombe. Yet inside nothing important had changed. Fresh bread filled the shelves. Poor children still received warm loaves every evening without charge. And beside the polished entrance stood the familiar wooden sign, No muddy boots beyond this door. One rainy afternoon, an elegantly dressed nobleman hurried toward the bakery, splashing through puddles without noticing the mud covering his expensive boots. Before he crossed the threshold, Eliza instinctively lifted her father's old wooden spoon. "I'm sorry," she said with the same calm smile she had worn months before. "No muddy boots in my bakery." The nobleman blinked in surprise. Before embarrassment could spread through the room, Nathaniel stepped forward laughing warmly. Without the slightest hesitation, the Duke of Ashcombe sat upon the doorstep, removed his muddy boots and placed them neatly outside. The customers burst into cheerful laughter. He entered the bakery wearing only his stockings. Walking directly toward Eliza, he accepted the wooden spoon from her hands before slowly lowering himself onto one knee. Not in a grand palace. Not beneath glittering chandeliers. But upon the same wooden floor where she had once refused him entry. Holding a simple ring, he looked into her tear-filled eyes. "The day you stopped me at this door," he said quietly, "you reminded me that respect earned through character is worth more than obedience demanded by rank. You saw an ordinary traveler before you saw a duke, and because of that, you helped me become the ruler my parents hoped I would be. Miss Eliza Whitmore, will you honor me by becoming my wife?" The bakery grew perfectly still. Eliza smiled through joyful tears. Instead of answering immediately, she gently placed the worn wooden spoon back into his hand. "Only if you promise," she whispered, "that no matter where life takes us." Nathaniel finished her sentence with a grin. "I'll always leave my muddy boots at the door." Laughter and applause filled the bakery as she slipped the ring onto her finger. Outside, soft spring rain began falling once again, washing the streets clean. From that day forward, Ashcombe gained not only a beloved duchess but a lasting lesson remembered for generations. Crowns may command obedience, but true greatness begins with humility, and the strongest kingdoms are built by those who never forget to wipe the mud from their boots before entering another person's heart.